Those who sacrifice liberty for security deserve neither. Those were the words that came from Benjamin Franklin, the 18th century American polymath, who was the oldest person at age 81 to sign the U.S. Constitution in 1787. That was the warning that he gave as a warning to those in the future that politicians, elites, and other power-hungry groups would use different national emergencies and threats to the United States, whether real or fiction, to take more and more liberties from American citizens in their power grabs. I was reminded of the wise words of Benjamin Franklin as I viewed different headlines this morning, the 13th of October 2021. A headline that stood out to me came from Reuters in regards to President Joe Biden's new federal vaccine mandate for U.S. companies. And the article went on to say that the U.S. Labor Department on Tuesday submitted to the White House the initial text of President Joe Biden's plan to require private sector workers to be vaccinated against COVID-19 or to get tested on a weekly basis. The department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration submitted the proposed rule for review. Some details could change, sources say. The move indicates the proposed standard could be released as soon as next week. The mandate will apply to businesses with 100 or more employees and will be implemented under a federal rulemaking mechanism known as an emergency temporary standard. It would affect roughly 80 million to 100 million U.S. workers. Some other key parts of the proposed plan from the Biden administration on the vaccine mandates. He says, all federal workers and contractors must get vaccinated with limited exceptions. Private employers with 100 or more workers will have to require them to be vaccinated or tested weekly. Employers must provide paid time off for vaccination. About 17 million healthcare workers in hospitals, clinics, and other facilities that accept Medicare and Medicaid payments must get vaccinated. Some 300,000 employees of Head Start, early childhood education, and other federal education programs must get vaccinated as well. There were also some notes in the plan that is being sent to U.S. Congress this week that federal agencies will lay the groundwork for a smooth booster shot campaign starting the week of September 20th if the FDA authorizes or approves such boosters. The shocking thing about President Biden's unconstitutional federal vaccine mandate is that he knows and his administration knows that what he is doing is unconstitutional and flies in the face of current standing Supreme Court precedent on the issue of vaccine mandates. And why do I say that? I say that because looking through the history of Supreme Court rulings on prior vaccine mandates in situations of health emergencies and risk, we know that the ruling case currently is the Jacobson versus Massachusetts case of 1905. So that 115-year-old case still remains the standing law to guide us as we try to understand the mandates coming from President Biden. So no matter what your personal feelings may be, no matter what your political ideology may be, what we're talking about here is, does the current sitting president of the United States have the power to issue federal vaccine mandates on the U.S. population at large? And the Supreme Court has already spoken on this, and absolutely not. So this mandate is unconstitutional. In the Supreme Court of the United States case of Jacobson versus Massachusetts, it was decided on the 20th of February, 1905. And the basic facts of that case were that there was a Massachusetts law that allowed cities within that state to require residents to be vaccinated against smallpox. The city of Cambridge adopted such ordinances for their residents with a few exceptions. The petitioner in that case, a resident of Cambridge by the name of Jacobson, had refused to comply with the requirement and was fined $5. Now that piece right there is critical. So not only was he required to submit to the mandate, but the city of Cambridge was fining their residents if they did not get this certain vaccine for the smallpox. So what happened is that the Supreme Court held that the Cambridge law and the state of Massachusetts law was a legitimate exercise of the state's police power to protect the public health and safety of its citizens. Local boards of health determined when mandatory vaccinations were needed at that time, thus making the requirement neither unreasonable nor arbitrarily, imposed upon those residents. So in its ruling, the Supreme Court had determined that there must also be certain exemptions for those that may be opposed to the usage of this police power for vaccination for religious reasons, different health reasons, and other categories. The basis of the court's decision was derived from its interpretation of states' rights in the U.S. Constitution that come from the 10th Amendment. So we know that the 10th Amendment says that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And I have to go on to add that in that decision, the Jacobson case, it was a 7-2 split decision where, true, the majority made the determination that the states had the right to pass a mandate or to also pass laws against the passage of a mandate. But there were two dissenting justices in that case, Justice Brewer and Justice Peckham. Knowing now that the decision was a 7-2 ruling in favor of state-ordered vaccines, we can look to the actual opinion of the court and see what Justice Harlan, who is writing for the majority of the court, said in regards to that police power. And he basically stated that part of living in a civilized society is that an individual has to give up some personal freedom in exchange for the benefits of being in a civilized society. The court argued that the petitioner, Jacobson, had sought to enjoy the benefits of his neighbors being vaccinated for smallpox without personally accepting the risk inherent in vaccination. The Supreme Court also rejected Jacobson's claim, which it viewed as an attempt to be a free rider on society. So, knowing the ruling and seeing that the majority in that case came to the conclusion that the states have that power, it's quite obvious that President Biden's unconstitutional mandate would be rejected on its face at the Supreme Court level. And I thought it was fascinating that those two dissenting justices in the case actually ruled in favor of the petitioner Jacobson, believing that his argument that he presented under the 14th Amendment, that he had a right to control his body even at risk of violating the state law. So Justice Brewer and Justice Peckham actually agreed with the petitioner, but they were outvoted 7-2. So naturally, someone that is studying this case of Biden's mandate would ask the question, so will the states sue Joe Biden? Well, indeed, 24 states have already joined in a coming lawsuit against the Biden administration once this mandate is passed. And we know this because 24 attorney generals put together a letter to President Joe Biden on the 16th of September 2021, warning him that if he went forward with this unconstitutional mandate, knowing what we know about the Jacobson and Massachusetts case, that this is a state police power, that they would sue him. And because of the nature of the suit, this would be a case that's expedited and sped through the courts and presented to the Supreme Court right away. And knowing what we know about the makeup of the current Supreme Court being 6 leaning conservative and 3 leaning toward the liberal, quote unquote, direction, I wouldn't be surprised if they overturn the Jacobson and Massachusetts precedent that's been 115 year standing precedent. And my reason is that if there were 2 sitting judges who rejected the case back then with the dynamic of that court, there's no guarantee that with the current ideological formation of the Supreme Court, that the majority may not say, you know what, we actually take the side of these states, and we also going to take it even further and say that the police power could even be unconstitutional. But definitely at this point, we know that Joe Biden's COVID-19 federal vaccine mandate is illegal as federal law, because under Biden's mandate, he would say to the states, I am, through my emergency powers, which is something that dictators have used throughout republics, is to use temporary emergencies to give themselves dictatorial powers. He's saying to the states that I, with my executive power, can overrule the state legislatures, and I can also overrule the Supreme Court. Well, obviously that's a violation of U.S. Constitution's checks and balances, separations of powers. The Supreme Court has already made it clear that any mandate that comes for vaccines has to be decided by the state legislature of each individual state, which is why the state of Florida and the state of Texas have come out against the Biden administration with the strongest voices, but most don't know that they're backed by 22 additional states as well. So those states are Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Texas, Utah, West Virginia, and Wyoming. So in the letter that they sent to Joseph Biden back on the 16th of September, they said, Dear President Biden, we, the attorneys general of 24 states, write in opposition to your attempt to mandate the vaccination of private citizens. On the 9th of September 2021, you announced that you would be ordering the Department of Labor to issue an emergency temporary standard under the Occupational Safety and Health Act, which would mandate that private sector employers require most of their employees to either get a COVID-19 shot, submit to weekly testing, or be fired. Your plan is disastrous and counterproductive. From a policy perspective, this edict is unlikely to win the hearts and minds. It will simply drive further skepticism, and at least some Americans will simply leave the job market instead of complying with this mandate. This will further strain an already too tight labor market, burdening companies and therefore threatening the jobs of even those who have received a vaccine. Worse still, many of those who decide to leave their jobs rather than follow your directive will be essential healthcare workers. This is no idle speculation. A New York hospital recently announced its plans to stop delivering babies after several staff members resigned in the face of New York's mandates. and recent polling suggests those frontline healthcare workers are not outliers. Thus, Mr. President, your vaccination mandate represents not only a threat to individual liberty, but a public health disaster that will displace vulnerable workers and exacerbate a nationwide hospital staffing crisis with severe consequences for all Americans. So what we know from the evidence presented so far is that at least 24 states have enacted COVID-19 related laws that have barred employer vaccine mandates, school vaccine mandates, or vaccine passports, which is exactly the police powers that have been interpreted as granted to the states to do so. We also know that it's clear there are no laws that allow the federal government to issue a vaccine mandate to the general U.S. population. So it's clear that Biden is in violation when he says to those businesses in those states who have determined that they do not want a vaccine mandate, that he will fine them $14,000 per violation with this dictatorial power that he's given himself. Also, the SCOTUS has made it clear that health mandates must be left to each individual state. So nothing in the U.S. Constitution suggests that the executive branch can impose blanket vaccine regulations on private business or their employees. One does begin to believe that President Joe Biden von Hindenburg may very well be a very masochistic individual. He must derive some sort of gratification from taking L's back to back to back, with the fall of U.S. influence in Afghanistan, the growing and ongoing border crisis, hyperinflation, and just an overall negative outlook on his current presidency. You have to imagine that when you look at the polls today, and it says that Biden's approval ratings are in total decline, and this is coming from the left-leaning media when they say that Americans are voicing their disapproval of President Joe Biden nearly 9 months after he took office. So in a string of national polls we've seen in the last week that about 49 to 50% of voters disapprove of Biden's handling of his presidency so far. And this level of malaise in year one for him, when the midterms are just around the corner, makes me believe that a true red wave is coming. But to add, more to his decline, you have to think, what happens when this case of the federal vaccine mandate goes before the Supreme Court and it's ruled that it's an unconstitutional act right in the middle of most likely the summer or at the very end of the Supreme Court's term, which usually happens in June or early July. Whatever mandate powers to force a vaccine upon the people that is had, we know that power comes from the 10th Amendment and is given to the states with their police power. So no amount of mob rule or the tyranny of the majority and the public opinion and the bully pulpit against those that are in the minority and that fight against this vaccine will change the law. At least half of American states are saying that we do not agree with these vaccine mandates. They have the backing of the Supreme Court, and the rest of America needs to accept that. But as the great 20th century journalist and writer H.L. Mencken warned us, most people want security in this world, not liberty, not freedom.